Okay. So a lot of the sessions today and tomorrow really build upon each other. And we have actually what we call really expected or planned redundancy. So there's some stuff that has brought up that I'm going to really sort of piggyback on and reinforce. And I hope that sort of by the end of today and tomorrow, you have this sort of solid framework for moving forward and getting started with your project. And we're all sort of really looking forward to seeing that finished part. So Ray spoke first about really, educational scholarship and how to think about turning the work that you do as students, as trainees, as faculty, wherever sort of stage you may be, but really all of us are teaching in some capacity. Thinking about turning that teaching into educational scholarship level, publishing your educational work. So it's really about like making it happen, putting it on paper or out there in, in the digital world, but really being able to disseminate that work. So that's the focus of my session. Right. Learning objectives. I'm going to reinforce Ray's already very message about the value of publishing in medical education. I see my internet is unstable, so if you're having trouble, just let me know and I'll turn my camera off. Obviously, as part of the fellowship, our expectation is that you will create and submit a completed manuscript and materials for a MedEd portal submission. So we'll get into sort of the nuts and bolts of really what MedEd portal is and why we're really pushing for this venue. But we're really going to also talk about the general landscape of medical education publications, sort of beyond MedEd portal. Where else can you publish your work? Because I think it's really always helpful. As Ray said, there are lots of ways we can make things count. Submission, your work this year can go as it can be repackaged a little differently with a different focus and also be submitted somewhere else for publication. So we'll talk about maybe those different venues for that. And then finally, we'll finish with sort of examining a very successful recent submission to MedEd portal as well. So maybe we'll use a chat board since I can't see all of you guys. First of all, have any of you, this is a question for the fellows, have any of you guys actually published anything yet? So if you have, let us know in the chat what it was and what form it was in. Or you can raise your hand to see. Go ahead. Your name's not showing up on my screen, so if you had your hand raised, let us know.
Hi, I had my hand raised. I'm not sure if anyone else did.
Yes, go ahead, Michelle. Go ahead.
I actually recently got my work published into MedEd portal, like within the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it was two years of work. It was on assessing the basic needs of medical students.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations to you. I think we'll definitely be circling back to you for some tips, and advice for us in this process. So that's great. Anyone else have other experiences? I see in the chat, is it Aljavis? I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Can you correct me if it's wrong? So Aljavis writes that she has published basic science research from graduate school, which is fantastic as well. And I think that definitely sort of cross over our experiences in other disciplines certainly can bring a lot of strength and sort of position us well to publish in medical education in particular. I'm going to be very honest with you. I didn't have any experience in publishing until several years into being an attending physician. So that was something that I'd always been a little bit sort of daunted by, to be honest with you. And it's still something that continues to daunt me in different ways, but it can be done. And so I think the whole real sort of magic to this year is really working with you to debunk your myths and face your fears and really get out there and put something out there, which so that's really what it's about. So let me move on to this slide here. Sorry, I'm just going to reformat this. So if you think about all of healthcare and all of the literature out there in healthcare, there's obviously many different domains, but medical education is really at the hub of it. And by MedEd, we're talking about teaching. I mean, teaching is what we do as physicians, as healthcare providers. So whether you're going to focus on basic science research or quality improvement, public health, clinical care or clinical research, we're always teaching. So I think that, with our focus on medical education and teaching as sort of the venues through which we create our scholarship and then we publish, I just think that again, it's not like there's medical research or medical literature and then education literature. We're really doing it all here. And I think that sometimes medical education scholarship doesn't get the sort of credit that it really deserves because, and I'll talk about sort of why in a second with the subsequent slides. Oops, let me see. Uh-oh. Why is it showing? Okay. And the reason why I think sometimes medical education scholarship and publications doesn't get the credit that it deserves is because when you look at this sort of pyramid in terms of studies and literature and what's published, right? So there's this sort of pyramid, there's always this kind of like sense of a hierarchy in terms of what's more rigorous, what has more data and what has more evidence behind it, what's more prestigious and maybe ultimately sort of more important. And I think that, obviously when we think about randomized controlled trials, systematic reviews sort of being up at the top of the pyramid, there's obviously a lot of work involved there. Medical education and scholarship is obviously different. Like we don't really run randomized controlled trials very easily, in education, and that's just not feasible a lot of times. But it doesn't mean that what we do isn't important and can't be published. So in this pyramid here, in terms of, there's editorials, letters, perspectives, case reports, cross-sectional case control studies, cohort studies. So medical education literature and publications tends to take up sort of a lot of this pyramid, though maybe not always a randomized controlled trial, but there certainly are systematic reviews as well in medical education literature. And this is just showing that exactly what I said, that sort of there's a lot of opportunities to publish on medical education literature, even if it's not fashioned as a randomized controlled trial or a systematic review. And again, I think Ray brought us to this slide again, but I think it's worth reminding ourselves in terms of what scholarship means. Scholarship is discovery, application, integration, which we all described, but it is also teaching and learning. So it's a little bit of a meta approach to it. It's thinking about what we're doing. And since I said teaching is sort of the foundation of all of healthcare, all of the domains of it, to sort of think about, reflect on, examine, evaluate, study, and then write about this process of teaching and learning is absolutely legitimate. And it's essential to really furthering our knowledge and our practice in healthcare. So it's a fundamental component of scholarship. And here, it's basically that study plus the peer review is really what scholarship is. And peer review is very much a part of our process in medical education publications. Pretty much everything that we publish now, if in a reputable source is going to be peer reviewed, and certainly is the case for MedEd portal submissions. Okay, so what can you publish in medical education? So obviously MedEd portal, we're going to get to that. That's what we're going to do this year, but let's take a step at back and look at the broader landscape. Again, so going back to this pyramid, the base, the editorials, the letters, the case reports, those are really, really important. And actually, I think that those are really, probably even there's more heightened awareness and recognition of the value of this than ever before. I think that there is really a push in medical education for increased inclusivity, increased equity, and that really means having more perspectives out there, perspectives like your own. So this is where I think editorials and letters are coming to be much more valued and really, really recognized as having a very important place in our medical literature. So I wanted to show you another schema. So in terms of the landscape of publishing, there's always a sort of original research, right? We did this study, this innovation, we studied it, we evaluated the results, here it was, wow, it affected not only our learners, but it affected our patients as well. And those are sort of, what you think of sort of as standard medical articles. And that's obviously, impressive and important, but there is so much more in the landscape of publishing. So and the numbers really represent word length, or sort of the lengths of the article. So an original research is a huge body, what we sort of think of as a typical medical article. But innovation reports tend to be briefer, and there are lots of different journals, incredible journals in which we have opportunities as medical educators and as trainees ourselves to publish innovation reports. And that's like where we're taking an idea and really sort of describing our idea and how we tried it out for the first time and lessons learned from it and where we want to go for it. And I'll describe that a little bit more in a second. And then there's all this other stuff, and I talked about sort of the importance of opinions and perspectives, commentary, letters to the editor, new ideas. Medical Education Journal has a really neat section called Really Good Stuff. This is really doesn't require necessarily the sort of same framework as conducting a full study, requiring IRB approval, which, obviously we're sort of going to talk about in a little bit. But this, again, is a big part of the publishing landscape. And I think this is actually a really wonderful entry point for many of us who may not have published before and are wondering sort of how do we get in there. These are incredibly important, and I'll give you some examples in a minute as well. And I don't want to omit the writing, the incredibly powerful and important writing about patient narratives. So there are many journals now. The JAMA has this, Journal of General Internal Medicine, Annals of Internal Medicine, often have essays written by physicians about patient experiences or patient narratives. So that's another venue for publishing in medical literature. So here, I'm sort of working with these terms, but here's some examples of different perspectives and editorials that have come out. This is one example here. This is an observations article in Teaching, Learning, and Medicine, which is a major journal in medical education, adapting Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a framework for resident wellness. Sort of taking an idea out there, obviously we're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and sort of reimagining it or reframing it. So that's one example. Thinking about perspectives. So this comes out of New England Journal of Medicine. Perspectives, again, are really editorials, but thinking about ways to reimagine or move education forward in healthcare or healthcare practice forward, I think is incredibly important. I didn't have a time to insert this, but I don't know, in June of this year, there was a very powerful perspective piece in New England Journal of Medicine called, that was titled Misogyny in Medicine. It was written by Dr. Erica Kay. It got 1 million tweets and retweets, but, and obviously generated a lot of important conversations at many institutions. So again, this is, I think, a testament to how powerful and impactful perspective writings can be. So I'd want you guys to think about this again, although this is not the focus of our year-long fellowship. These are opportunities for you as members of our healthcare community to really have your voice be heard. Then in terms of other types of articles, there's sort of like the practical articles in medical education, the sort of, how did you do it? What did you learn? Can I do it too? And it's really, again, about this sort of sharing our experiences, sharing our best practices. And there's really a lot of opportunities to write about that. This is a really fun article title, Epic Failure, Lessons Learned from Interprofessional Faculty Development. So in medical education, we also want to hear, we don't want to hear just about what worked, we want to hear about what didn't work and why it didn't work. Again, because we're a community, we're all teaching and we're all sharing our experiences, learning from each other so that we can teach better. So, thinking about things, I think this is just such a great way to make lemonade out of lemons. If you have an idea and it doesn't work out, don't just stop there. Really think about why it didn't and what you can share with the community and what you can publish about it. So this was in Perspectives in Medical Education. Okay, so again, I think I highlighted most of these. Again, these are sort of considered to be short form manuscripts. They tend to be less than 1,000 words. These are your perspectives. These are commentaries, different insights. Again, I talked about this series in medical education called Really Good Stuff, which is worth checking out. I don't think I put any examples in this slide set, but these are all sort of different columns or sections in medical education journals where you can look and really see if there is an opportunity for you to contribute. And Ray had mentioned something which I think is really helpful. He said that when you have sort of an idea in mind, let's say if you have an educational activity in mind, always think about that end product, right? The final product. Think about like, how would I get this published? Like, what would it look like? So I think that if you are familiar with the templates or the submission criteria for these different types of articles, for example, if you look and see, okay, what is really good stuff about, and understand sort of the framework of like what's required for a submission, that can help you create and craft your actual educational project so you know what pieces you need to have in place. Likewise, we're going to spend the second half of this talk really going more into MedEd portal submissions, like what does that actually look like, so that, you know, for this year, you know that from the beginning. Maybe, you know, as you create your educational activity and deliver it, you know exactly what you want to have in place so that you'll be ready for that MedEd portal manuscript submission. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about innovation reports, which are a common feature in academic medicine, which I think is probably our premier print medical education journal, though by no means the only one. Innovation reports are really a common format, and I think I talked about this a little bit earlier in the talk. So it's really about the early stages. Let's say you have a really great idea on something that you just haven't really found a lot of in the literature. So if you start to if you develop something new, a new educational module on maybe an innovative topic or an innovative way of delivering it, you can write that up. It doesn't have to be done, right? You don't necessarily have to have the results and show so much of an impact, but it can be, if an idea is novel enough and relevant and interesting, you can actually use that early stage and create a fantastic publication out of it. So let me give you some examples of this. Let's see here, it shows up. Okay, so this is a sort of typical innovation report structure. This is a sample article that came out of academic medicine. Coached peer review, developing the next generation of authors. And we picked this one because it really is sort of a little similar to what this whole fellowship is about, right? So it was about creating basically a process to help people become, you know, peer reviewers, to help people really get familiar with the process of publishing in academic journals. And so the components of it were sort of describing the problem, like what is the problem? What did you do about it? The approach. So the approach is really what has to be, you know, the problem and the approach are really what makes an innovation report a successful publication. It's an important problem, and it's a novel approach that hasn't been done before. And then the outcomes can be really, really preliminary. So here, you know, in terms of this article, the outcomes were really survey results of the participants who said they really liked the process. It was easy, efficient, transparent. They feel have an increased confidence in their published materials. And so that's really it. So it's even that sort of that basic Kirkpatrick level of really sort of, did you like it? Did you not? How did the learners respond to the experience? I think can be very, it is sufficient. And then with innovation reports, it's always important to include the idea of next steps. Like where are you going to go with this? Obviously with an innovation report, we don't want to hear that you're just going to stop there, but really, how are you going to scale it up? How might you modify it? How might you disseminate this at other institutions? So this is something to think about. And I want to give an example. I'm going to give a shout out to some of my fellows from last year's VenGap program who created a wonderful workshop on family planning options for transgender couples. And they had done a really great literature review. I hadn't found much in the medical education literature on this, and created a workshop about it, which obviously is very novel since there is very little published on it. But I think that is something that could be a really terrific innovation report if it's a new idea or addressing a problem in a new way. Okay, another sort of genre, I guess, or group cluster of articles that I'd love to get you guys familiar with is something called 12 Tips, which is, I believe, in Medical Teacher. And 12 Tips really is sort of a nuts and bolts type of article. How do you teach something? 12 tips. So this article, 12 tips for incorporating and teaching sexual and gender minority health in medical school curricula. So it really sort of breaks it down into, maybe an institution will say, this is how we did it, and this is what we learned from it. And they will really literally write out 12 tips. So this might be something as well that's useful for you to think about as many of you are creating your own novel curricula. This is an example. Unfortunately, I don't have much of the article, but this is an example of a patient narrative that comes out of the Lancet. So this is called the library card, and it really is an essay about a patient experience. Many journals have this. This is not necessarily about a medical education scholarly project. It's really often about a personal experience between a patient and a physician, but it can absolutely, once it's disseminated and out there, it can be used as a teaching mechanism as well. Many of these articles usually are very powerfully written, highlight some maybe an ethical dilemma or humanistic components of medicine. So there's opportunities to use that as future education. So while this kind of essay may not be medical education scholar, or may not have started as medical education scholarship, it can certainly add to that body of literature. And I don't know if many of you are familiar with this, and I'm sorry, oh, this doesn't look good at all. On the way I zoomed it, I'm sorry, the way I expanded this, you can't really see it. But oftentimes in the last page of Academic Medicine, they have this sort of infographic, one-page article, which is sort of like an outline format, something quick, something that catches your eye. You can read it, digest it. So this one, it says, congratulations, your article's been accepted, now what? Media, social media, and other outlets for promoting your work. And it really isn't like a bullet format and tells you quick and, dirty or sort of tips in terms of what you can do. So again, I think this is, for all of you, hopefully by the end of this year, when you have an accepted article for, an article that's been accepted for publication, what should you do with it? Something like this can actually be very useful to you. So this is part of our medical education literature as well. Do we have any artists in the audience? So a lot of medical journals have graphics and art sections as well. Again, really bringing out the humanities and medicine. So this is one example of something in Annals, which often has illustrations or paintings or photographs. I think the New England Journal of Medicine often has photographs, right, by physicians out there. Okay, so I hope this has all brought home the point that you can publish in many places. And these are just names of some different journals out there. Okay, so now let's pivot and let's talk about MedEd Portal, which we're going to talk about for the rest of the year together in this fellowship. Okay, so congratulations, Michelle already has a publication accepted to MedEd Portal, which is great. And I want to say that for all of you guys at the end of the year. MedEd Portal is really a clearinghouse. It's an open access journal run through the AAMC. And it is peer reviewed and it supports medical and educational dental education resources that have already been implemented and evaluated. So I think you've heard about this already, but I just want to make sure everyone really understands what makes MedEd Portal unique compared to other journals. It's really like a publication that gives you the toolkit. So it's the actual materials that you have created or that others have created and implemented and evaluated and are now ready for use by others. It's out there. So it is all open access. And by self-contained, it means that it has not only sort of an article summarizing what the educational activity was, but it has the actual material so that other institutions, other educators can pick it up and use it at their own organizations and institutions. So there's lots of different types of publications within MedEd Portal. Again, these are all different ways, different modalities for teaching. Someone mentioned that she ran an escape room or was working on that, which is fantastic. And I think that could definitely be a wonderful MedEd Portal publication. So a lot of times the sort of novelty comes out of taking a common problem and just delivering teaching it in a different way. So through simulation, PBLs, TBLs, games, workshops. So this is really what MedEd Portal is interested in. As I mentioned, it's online and open access. I have, as an educator, have used this many, many times by saying, okay, I really want to teach, make sure our students learn about, for example, trauma-induced care. And so I can search that in MedEd portal, find articles, find materials used by other medical schools, and I can use that at my own institution as well. And that's all through the Creative Commons license. So in the MedEd portal submission, and I think people have talked about this, there's the educational summary report, and then there's the appendices. So the ESR is really what you think of when you think of the article, right? There's an abstract, there's describing the methods. We'll go into sort of the different components. That's the article itself, but the appendices are the actual teaching materials that you use. Did you have a PowerPoint presentation? Did you have cases to discuss? Did you have guiding questions for the discussion? Did you have, faculty guides? All of that goes into the appendix. So together, your ESR plus your appendix will make your submission. As I mentioned in the ESR, there are different components, and these read very much like a standard article, scientific article. So you have, what were the educational objectives? You have an introduction, the methods, how did you do it? What were your results? And then your discussion and conclusions. And then in the actual MedEd portal website, it will have the ESR listed, right? It'll have the educational objectives. You will see the ESR printed out, and then there will be a downloadable appendix, which will have all of the actual education materials in it. So it's good to be really familiar with this. Many of you may have already used MedEd portal, but if you haven't used it yet, I would really encourage you to go look at the website this weekend while it's sort of fresh in your mind. Pick an interesting topic to you, search it, find an entry that piques your curiosity, and look at it. Look at how the ESR is written, download the appendix, and look at it, because you really want this roadmap before you actually start your project. Okay, and this is just zooming in on what the appendix is for this article. I got cut off. I was sort of just describing why MedEd portal was different from the traditional journals. Oops. I do want to say this, and known, you can do both. You can take your same educational project and you can really pitch it as a MedEd portal submission, and then actually also submit it to a traditional journal. So if you had, again, sort of a workshop on this family planning for transgender families workshop was created by my fellows last year. If they actually have the PowerPoint presentation, the cases, the faculty guides, that is a wonderful MedEd portal submission. But if they actually have done it and they've collected sort of evaluation data now, more robust evaluation data, and have sort of more details about the methodology, they can actually, in the terms of what the results of that was, they can also submit that to a traditional medical education journal. So think about that idea of making it count twice. I think there are lots of different opportunities to do so. And sometimes, I do review for traditional journals, and sometimes I'll find a submission which may not be quite right for the journal itself. And one of my suggestions to them will be like, this is, because there's not enough sort of rigorous details given about the methodology and the evaluation methods of it, but this is a really interesting or important idea. So you may want to consider submitting this to MedEd portal by including the actual educational materials that you created. So it kind of goes both ways. And I think you guys should keep yourselves open to that opportunity. Okay, and then I'm going to conclude with an example of a wonderful MedEd portal submission. This one was done by Dr. Andrea Garcia, who is a NGAP board member. I'm just gonna give you 1 second to get to my notes, because I wanted to make sure I had her biography right. So she is a citizen of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation, and also a Mexican American. Dr. Garcia's interests include improving the health of American Indians and Alaska Natives through population health, health services, and health equity. So she is at the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, and she works at the only county-run Alaska American Indian and Alaska Native mental health clinic in the county. So this is a really wonderful example of what Ray described earlier as taking your personal passions and really turning it into scholarship, and then taking that scholarship and turning it into a publication. So Dr. Garcia created this module called the Case Study in Los Angeles, really to educate healthcare providers about healthcare needs, about the social structural determinants of health for urban American Indian and Native Alaska Native patients in urban areas. And there was really very little out there published on this before, but she created this to really help healthcare providers deliver culturally competent care to this population. So in this module, there are photos used, there's stories used as well to really highlight and illuminate structural social determinants of AIA and health. Dr. Garcia also put this into historical perspective. So she created a timeline showing the different sort of historic and political events and laws which impacted the health and conditions for Native American and Alaska Native, American Indian and Alaska Native patients in the United States. And she also has beautiful photographs here used to really, again, highlight the experiences of this population. She gives demographic information. So it's really sort of a historical, political perspective, as well as structural perspectives to really help healthcare providers understand the conditions that are impacting the health of this population. And for this, Dr. Garcia won a MedEd Portal Award, is sort of best of, which is a best submission, which is the editor's choice for best MedEd Portal publication. And it's given to less than 1% of all publications every year. So this is, obviously very successful, but I think is a really nice example, again, of how you take your personal passion, how you can turn that into education, and then how you can ultimately disseminate it in MedEd Portal. I'm going to stop here just because I want to keep us on time. I hope you have a lot of questions about MedEd Portal, because that's what we're going to work on for the rest of the year together. But hopefully this gives you a little bit more perspective on what the process is going to be. I think there's time for maybe one or two questions if anyone has any.